Hey guys, tonight we're sinking into something that's equal parts funny, gross, and oddly comforting. Picture a medieval castle, towering stone walls, flickering torchlight, a great hall echoing with laughter and the clink of goblets. It looks majestic in movies, right? But here's the little secret. Those same halls were also echoing with the scratching of tiny claws. Because for all their grandeur, castles were basically luxury hotels for rats and mice. Yes, the great fortresses of kings and queens, symbols of power and authority, were also full of whiskered squatters who didn't pay rent and never left. So tonight, dim the lights, settle in, and let's drift back into the strange history of how people in castles actually tried, and failed, to deal with rats and mice. Now, first reality check. Castles were not clean. They weren't shining marble palaces. They were cold, damp, drafty, and built around storing food. Grain, bread, beer, cheese, all the good stuff. And where there's food, there are rodents. A medieval pantry was like a rodent buffet, complete with crumbs on the floor and plenty of dark cracks in the walls to hide in. So really, rats didn't invade castles. They just moved in. What did people do about it? Well, the obvious answer was cats. Cats have been freeloading in human homes for thousands of years, and castles were no exception. Ladies-in-waiting kept them as pets, servants tolerated them as pest control units, and nobles occasionally spoiled them with scraps from banquets. Did cats help? Sure. But for every mouse they caught, 10 more were nibbling quietly in the grain cellar. Dogs also played a role, specifically small, wiry terriers bred to chase vermin. They were like living mousetraps, although a bit noisier and more destructive. Still, better a barking terrier than an army of rats chewing your tapestry. As for traps, let's just say medieval engineering had some limits. These weren't sleek metal snap traps. They were usually crude wooden boxes propped up with sticks or pits dug in cellars. Sometimes they worked, sometimes they didn't, and sometimes you accidentally trapped your own cat, which did not go over well. And then came poison. Medieval poison recipes could make a modern health inspector cry. Crushed herbs, arsenic, even ground up glass. Yes, glass. Because what's a better idea than scattering invisible shards in a kitchen where barefoot servants run around in the dark? Not exactly health and safety approved. But even with cats, dogs, traps, and questionable poisons, rodents remained part of castle life. And then the 14th century came along and made everything worse. Enter the Black Death. Fleas carried on rats brought the plague, and castles, those supposed bastions of safety, were hit just like everywhere else. Suddenly, those whiskered squatters weren't just annoying, they were terrifying. Did this inspire smarter pest control? Not really. In fact, people panicked and blamed cats, killing them in large numbers, which naturally made the rat population explode. Genius move. Other nobles ordered smoky fumigations, burning herbs like rosemary to cleanse the air. It didn't work on fleas, but at least the bedrooms smelled festive. Professional rat catchers also emerged, creeping through castle corridors at night with sticks, ferrets, or little dogs. Some became minor celebrities. By the Victorian period, one even called himself rat catcher to Her Majesty Queen Victoria, and strutted around in a uniform. Imagine, entire royal households depending on a scruffy man with a sack and a stick to keep the rodents under control. But the truth is, rodents were never really controlled. Even in the Renaissance, nobles leaned on charms and magic. Some buried parchment with rat names written on it, convinced this would drive them away. Others used poisons made of mercury or, hilariously, crushed emeralds. Because nothing says efficiency like spending a fortune on gemstone rat repellent. Meanwhile, the rats carried on as usual, probably laughing in squeaks. Ferrets became another castle trick, slipping into holes to flush rodents out. But ferrets smelled awful and often stole food themselves, so really they were just new roommates with worse manners. It's almost poetic how every supposed solution just created a new problem. And yet, rodents weren't always seen as purely evil. Some philosophers claimed rats were reminders from God, symbols of humility, there to nibble at royal feasts and remind kings they were human after all, which is a very fancy way of saying everyone had rats, deal with it. By the 18th and 19th centuries, castles were fading into relics. Nobles moved into palaces and manors, leaving the drafty fortresses behind. But the rats? They stayed. Arsenic powders and strychnine baits became common, and cats were even listed on household budgets like staff members. Still, rodent sightings in kitchens and storerooms never stopped. Castles became ruins, ivy curling over the stones, tourists wandering through empty banquet halls. And yet, in the shadows, little shapes still scurried. And maybe that's the quiet irony of the whole story. Castles were supposed to be symbols of strength, wealth, and control. Yet inside, tiny uninvited guests always proved who really ruled the place. Not the kings, not the queens, but the mice in the pantry and the rats in the walls. So if you take anything to bed tonight, it's this: history's grandest fortresses were never really fortress-proof. Stone walls could keep out invading armies, but not a mouse. Monarchs lived, reigned, and died, while the rats just kept nibbling away, eternal, unbothered, and maybe just a little smug. And with that thought, drift off, knowing your walls are probably stronger than a medieval castle's. Sleep well.